I'm Pat DeLuca, and this session we're going to be talking about image handling, and
I'm Steve Johnson. I'm one of the DP2 developers. I handle a lot of the image processing tasks within DP2. And
right.
we're going to be talking about some of the new features that have been added to DP2 over the past year or so.
So, okay, there we go. I just want to remind everybody this session will also have Q&A at the end of the session, so we'll have you an opportunity to answer questions, and this is just the reminder about how to do it. I'll show it to you again when we get to the end of this session. So these are the items that we're going to cover in terms of image handling for version 20.2. And I'll just kind of highlight them real briefly, and then we're going to go through them. Kind of same format that we used before, in that we're going to stick to PowerPoint so the screenshots are large and enlarged. And then if we need to answer a question, Steve's going to be prepared with DP2 on his system so that you'll be able to get, hopefully, everything that you need. So some of the things we're going to be talking about is some color management, improvements for image handling, import images, the images window, export images, and color management. So let's get started. So the first one that we're going to talk about is some of the improvements to both DP2 and KC2 workflows in terms of understanding and leveraging the original image metadata for orientation.
Right. A lot of images come in with metadata set to indicate how they should be rotated when they're read from disk. DP2 doesn't traditionally use that metadata when we open up images. Instead, we rely on an entry in our database to tell the system how to rotate images. However, it's very easy now to use that metadata to load DP2's database with all that orientation instruction for every image. So we can do it now from the import images dialog, and we can also do it after images are imported through a right-click option in the Order Images window.
And we've shown, I've got screen grabs there of both of those. So you can see that now there's a new entry on the Import Images window, and there is a new right-click menu for using the metadata to set the rotation. There's also an entry underneath there for setting the orientation in the image file.
That's right. Now that's the entry, that's been there in DP2 for several years. And I think it's very seldom used, and it really should be very seldom used. But if you have the need to set the rotation metadata flag in the image file for whatever reason, suppose you're sending the image out for retouching and you want to make sure that the metadata flag is set correctly for the retouching app, here's a way to do it. But typically that option is not used very often.
Yeah. So, and this for both for labs that are automating in other ways and for KC2 labs, this will give you the opportunity to really understand what is it the photographer sees and or thinks they're seeing, and understanding that in DP2 in an automated way.
Right.
So the next solution that we want to talk about is what some of the things that have been enhanced in export images. And a couple of the things right at that are not so much, not everything is new, but what we're doing is we're kind of leveraging what was happening in other places.
Right. In export images workflows, sometimes it's necessary to export images from DP2 in the same format, in the same color space as you received them from the photographer. What's even more important these days is that many images are coming in now with extra metadata inserted into the image file in XMP format. So what we've done is to enable you to reproduce all of that original metadata that the photographer might have entered into the image file during his editing process and save it in your exported image file. The catch is, though, that the images must be exported in the EXIF format. So in your Export Images dialog, choose EXIF as the format for the image. When you do that, also, any existing camera metadata that's normally stored as EXIF tags, those tags are also preserved and reproduced.
As you can see, we've just added that right to where we originally had,
Right.
overriding the image,
That's right.
setting the image rotation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
another new feature. We've been asked to provide the means to enable images to be exported from DP2 in exactly the same orientation as they've been received. So now there is a new checkbox option in the Export Images dialog that allows you to do that. DP2 will read the orientation tag from the image that came into DP2, and it will orient the image in that rotation when you export it.
Okay. So a couple of other things that have been added to the export images workflow, if you will, is the ability to set up and use an export setup in both the customer and the order data table. So that if you have a setup that's customer-based or order-based, you'll then be able to have that export images window open and have the right setup already preloaded for you.
Exactly. If you have a customer who, for example, wants their images exported back to them in a particular format or particular image size or any of the standard properties, you can create an export images setup specifically for that customer, save the name of that setup in the customer data table. So whenever you open up an order for that customer, that export images setup will automatically be populated in the dialog.
It's really it's a nice way of understanding and respecting customer preferences in an export images workflow.
Yep.
Before we actually do this, I want to, a couple of other things have happened in color management, which I think we had originally intended to talk about at the very beginning. So I want to just quickly talk and let Steve talk a little bit about the color management enhancements, because some of those are important in all of your workflows. The first one of those is that we've done a lot of work to handle what might have been understood as defective JPEG files.
Yes, yes. Over the past couple of years, we've seen an increase in the number of files coming into labs that have caused DP2 to fail to open those files. Many of these are JPEG files, and we've discovered that they don't conform strictly to the JPEG standards. For example, they might have extra bytes in different JPEG segments, or they may have a premature end of file marker in one of the segments. Sometimes DP2 could handle those defective JPEG files. Sometimes the errors were so egregious that DP2 would simply fail and sometimes hang. What we've done is to do some more research. We build in some more error checking, and when we find an image that fails to open with our particular set of libraries, we default to using a new set of libraries that actually handle those images pretty well. If for some reason there's still an image that has an error condition that we cannot handle, DP2 is going to fail gracefully and will simply be able to move on.
Right. It won't hang.
That's right.
The other improvement for DP2 and image handling is that now we're fully color managed for PNG files, so that those don't fall outside the system. You'll be able
That's
to,
right.
gracefully is a good
That's
word,
right.
be able to gracefully manage those
Right.
within your existing
Yeah.
workflows.
Usually PNG files are considered to be encoded in the standard sRGB color space, but the standard for PNG does allow the files to be encoded in a different color space, provided that the color profile is embedded in the PNG file. The changes we've made to DP2 in the past year will allow us to accurately extract those embedded profiles from the PNG files and handle PNG images just like JPEGs and TIFFs through a fully color managed workflow.
Okay. So what you're looking at here is something that has been actually around for a little while, but what we wanted to do is just highlight.
That's right.
Because we've talked a little bit about input and what's going on with the metadata, but here we wanted to just highlight for you the idea of color managing the output based on what was in the original image file, or
Right.
what the profile was either embedded or the space that it was in from input.
Yeah. This goes along with some of your photographers requesting images to be exported back to them with the same characteristics as you received them. So that would include color space. So in the export images dialog, there are checkboxes that you can use to automatically tell DP2 to color manage back the images back into their original color space. These would override whatever color management selections you had made in the printer queues or the printer table.
Oh, good point. Yeah. So speaking of color management, this is actually one of my favorites, and a lot of you out there that we've talked about how do you handle operator bias. You get your whole system color managed, and then your operator has 3+ or 3- one color or another, and it makes it really a much more complicated endeavor to try to keep everything in line. So one of the features that's been added for version 20.2 is the ability to manage your operators from a dialog box called, or a table called View Profile, which is available to you from the admin taskbar.
Right.
And assuming you have admin rights, that will allow you to create offsets for DRGB, which is really an effective, much more
That's right.
efficient way of trying to understand what's going on
Right.
at that monitor.
Yeah. It's always best to calibrate all of your systems, all of your monitors to a standard, and not try to modify those calibrations for any individual person
Right.
who's working on that monitor. We've now provided a way that you can make compensations for operator bias through the View Profiles table. Every entry in this table is unique for each combination of workstation and user. So for a given user on a given workstation, if you have discovered that there's a visual bias, perhaps, that comes into play when the operator is making color corrections, you can compensate for that bias in this table, and therefore improve your overall uniformity of production.
Now, and if I just want to mention one other thing, is that it is not only by workstation but by user. So
That's
a
right.
user in DP2 would be a user that existed in the user data table, again, another admin function.
Right.
That's based on Windows logon.
Yeah.
So they would be logging on. So if you are not a lab, if you're a lab that everybody is logging on to the same computer with the same username, you might want to consider, if you wanted to do something like
That's right.
this, having everybody log on under a different name.
That's right. Another thing to emphasize here is that these biases will only be applied to images that are being displayed on that monitor.
That's right.
They are not included as any compensations in the image rendering for
Right.
products or export images.
Yeah. And-
It's
and-
only for display.
So, and it's actually kind of another, is just to mention, right, that this is all about soft proofing.
That's right.
This is all about what do you see on screen and what's coming out, being able to accurately predict what's coming out of the printer.
That's right.
So those are really important aspects to this whole, when you're thinking about color management from beginning to end. Soft proofing is a big player in how that all works. So here's another way in which we manage our color out to the printer. This, though, is about the printer and not
Right.
about the operator.
Right. We've added 3 new fields to the printer queue table and also the printer table that will allow you to modify the highlight, shadow, or midtone contrast segments of the images or pages being printed on those particular printers. For example, you might have a printer that is calibrated. The calibration works fine. You get good feedback from the calibration software, but you still don't have exactly the tone scale you want, perhaps in the highlights. Traditionally, the way to tweak that has been to modify or edit an output profile, which is a time-consuming and sometimes costly endeavor.
Can be, yeah.
Instead of trying to do it through a customized output profile, you can make a slight change to the highlight contrast in one of the printer queue tables and achieve the same results. We're using the same type of technology that we use in the adjust images workflow for highlight, shadow, and midtone contrast. So if you want to try using this to tweak the printer results, you can benchmark it as an image adjustment on your test images, get what you want, and then insert those numbers into the printer queue.
To give it a try.
Yeah,
I think
that's right.
benchmark is an important word there, because that's really about what you see on screen,
That's
trying
right.
to get as far as you can, and that would be, would actually be in the order items data table that you would try to do something like that, right? Or that's where you would see
Well-
the output,
Well,
right?
it would show up in the order items soft proof.
Yep.
But in terms of determining how much adjustment to make to an image, you can simply benchmark it in the adjust images window with the large image view
Right.
and see the effect of the contrast change.
And use that to kind of help
Right.
you manage that printer, just tweak it to the
Yeah.
top of wherever it is you want
Yeah.
it to be. So now we open it up for questions, and this time I'll remember my earbuds so I can hear you all. We think we have the kinks worked out of this process, right? So hopefully that's the case. I have to unmute myself at this point, right? Okay.
No, don't unmute yourself. You can just talk into that mic.
Okay.
But you do have to have your headset on to listen for questions. So we have two questions around progressive JPEGs. They're asking, are progressive JPEGs supported? And then Rudy notes that progressive JPEGs error out in the render engine.
In general, progressive JPEGs work just like any other JPEGs. However, what we have found that if you are running in a lean memory environment, meaning that you don't have a whole lot of memory available to your system, progressive JPEGs take a lot more memory to decompress, and you will run into a memory error faster with a progressive JPEG than a normal JPEG.
All right. And we have a question from Kate Dempsey. Kate, go ahead.
Hi, actually, it's Penny O'Donnell. Just a quick question on the color management. Hi, Pat.
I can't hear.
The color management, is that applicable on the export as well? So, like export images? So if I run it through like a specific printer, render engine for exporting, can I apply the highlight, the shadow, and the midtone? Can I adjust them? Will that change the image that's exported?
So I'm going to bring up the export images window, and I'm going to ask you to ask that last part of that question again. Okay.
So when you said on the printer queue, you can change the highlight, shadow, and midtone. You can adjust them for a printer. Would that still apply to an image that was exported if I have a render engine set up just for that export?
Yes, because what you would do is do it in the printer queue, right? So if you were doing an export images and you have to use a queue to do that, so here if we destination, this queue here, you would want to set that up in that queue.
Okay.
Does that make
So
sense?
it's not just for print, it's for the export too. It would apply whatever settings we set there to that.
Correct.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. So it's the whole theory
Yeah.
of printer being output,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And we had a question from Dale Spencer. Dale, go ahead.
Do you want to present?
Dale, if you're there, go ahead.
Or you can go ahead and type it in the chat pod if you can't get your audio going. feel like I should wait. We're trying to
And
gather questions.
Patrick Jagger, go ahead.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So there's a couple things. One, in the use of the metadata, is there a trigger or a tag to pass through something like command process or some other importer so that that can be used automatically?
Not currently as a metadata. What we've done, what we've done so far is to ensure that any original XMP metadata that you've received in an image from a photographer will be reproduced. In the future, we're looking at possibilities of allowing you to create custom metadata. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Yeah, I'm just thinking more of sometime the camera rotation doesn't come through on the import, and we just want to make sure we're always using that to get the image right reading. So,
Right, something like a keyword.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then on the EXIF export, is it just a matter of using EXIF, or is there some other checkbox or
All you have to do is select EXIF as the export format.
And then when you go to color management, down here. So you would select for it to use that, right?
Right.
Sure. Okay, good.
Okay.
I did have a request from one of the technicians. Was currently there's fastest and best quality to preview the details of an image, and they'd like an intermediate.
Oh, there is one, right?
Yeah.
It's for jobs.
Yeah.
Right? You want the same thing here,
Right.
right?
Okay.
Okay. Feature request.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, great. You bet.
Are there any other questions out there?
Okay.
Okay.
I think we're going to give you a few minutes. Okay.
One just came in.
Oh, wait, hold that.
Victoria's question is yes. I'm going to unmute you, Victoria. Try and ask that into your computer. You might have to unmute in the upper right of the GoToWebinar panel.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I was just going to type it out, but okay. My question is about batch processing. We have some customers that have inconsistency with their images, and they can submit anywhere from tens to hundreds of images at one time. So my question is directly about a baseline that we set. If we have, for example, 10 or 15 images within that set that are going to take about, -30 density to bring it up to an acceptable exposure, and then we have some images that are, just 10 density underexposed, how would that baseline work? Would it actually look at the image information and treat each image individually, or would it just say, oh, you've set this baseline to be at, -30 density, and that's how it would treat all the images?
Could you elaborate, perhaps? Is this a school workflow?
Sure.
No.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying to understand the question. One second.
Oh, somebody else is asking the question.
Well, let me maybe try to answer this in a general sense. DP2 includes. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What was your question about elaborating?
What I meant was, what type of images would be included in this large set? Would they be school pictures, or would they be wedding candids, for example?
Well, we have 2 large clients right now, and they vary from event work to studio work to outside athletics.
Okay. Certainly, the event work or athletic work, you might expect to see some exposure variations from image to image. DP2 does include a scene balance algorithm, which can help reduce the exposure variability amongst a set of images like that. For a school workflow, we'd recommend a different algorithm based on the group balance, in which all the images are analyzed, and we try to use the information from each image to balance all of the images. So it's a little bit different algorithm, but it's designed specifically for schools.
Okay.
Have you tried using the scene balance algorithm at all?
I personally have not, no.
Okay. So the scene balance algorithm, if you want to try it on a body of test images, what you can do is you can look at it in a manual workflow by using the DRGB, the density, the RGB buttons here on Adjust Images. The digital scene balance algorithm is designed for batch processing. So that might, depending on whether or not all of those things appear in the same order, that might be a good solution if the outdoor images is in one order and some of the other things are in the other, because that'll go ahead and analyze the image content.
And what was that?
Well, this is the auto balance. So what auto balance does is it uses a preference based on some exposure values.
Right.
And it allows you to then, with your preference set up, DP2 will automatically try and understand the image content. And if you're using all 4 channels, or just density, or just RGB, then it'll go ahead and make a correction to those images automatically. And that has a batch processor.
Okay.
Okay. The difference between that and the group balance window is that the group balance window kind of looks across all of the images together, as well as the individual images. It also takes into account date and camera model and
right.
other things
Right.
to try to bring those in line with each other.
And it's specifically designed for
For
schoolwork, where you have a standard setup, you have a head and shoulder shot of students, and your expectation is that all those images will be balanced consistently, or you want them to be balanced consistently when they're printed on a page.
Okay.
Okay? We have 1 more minute, so hopefully we have 1 more question.
Yeah, we've got a quick one.
Okay, oh, good.
Can you show us what the shadow, midtone, and highlight contrast controls look like in the printer queue?
Yeah,
Sure.
you have that.
In the printer queue, let's see. It's amazing what you can't remember when you're...
Yeah.
So those controls are here at the end of, I gotta find it. There we go. So they're the last 3 fields in the printer queue, and they're just offsets. So there'd be values of, units 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever.
Right.
And what you would do with an image, if you wanted to kind of test this, is what we were talking about earlier, was using Adjust Images. On the Adjust Images window, you have the ability to manage and manipulate the contrast, and you can go ahead and move, work with these sliders to see what you think, kind of anticipate what kinds of things you're going to want to do at the printer, and then you can experiment by trying these values right here in the printer, or in the printer queue.
Yeah. And another thing to note is that you have access to these contrast adjustments in the printer wizard as well.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yep. So you can set it up when you set up
Yeah.
the printer itself.
Yeah.
And we're out of time. I just noticed the big red sign. Thank you all.